Tonight is all about keeping the spirit of Brian Keenan alive. Brian was one of the greatest Republican leaders that our movement has ever known. He was once dubbed by Tony Blair's Chief of Staff as the single biggest threat to the British state. I was chatting about him earlier to Conor Murphy and Mickey Brady, and Mickey, I think, referred to him as Ireland's answer to Che Guevara, which is a good measure of the calibre of the man that we're dealing with. A native from Belfast, Brian made his home here in South Armagh, and we were only too lucky to have him. The esteem in which he was held came shining through when both Cullyhanna and West Belfast came to a standstill on his passing. He dedicated his life to the struggle for Irish independence as one of our movement's foremost strategists, and it's in no small measure due to Brian that our struggle is now in its advanced stages. He was instrumental in the peace process and in shaping Republican politics. Brian's politics and his thinking were constantly guided by his socialist principles, and that's something that inspired me as a young political activist from South Armagh. In an interview with Óglach shortly before he passed away, Brian said, "Revolution is not about guns, it is about intent. At a time of great change, we need to constantly lay out the Republican vision. We need to constantly remind people what we are for: equality, liberty and fraternity. To me, the enemy was always capitalism and its system of exploitation. To me, the national question was always a class question." What was important about Brian was he was also a keen internationalist, and in the Republican movement in Ireland we have connections to struggles all over the world, and tonight we're honouring his memory by focusing on the struggle that our Palestinian brothers and sisters face. They face the most cruel and violent occupation and oppression, which has persisted for decades in Palestine since the illegal formation of the Israeli state on Palestinian lands. This year in particular has been harrowing, as thousands have been killed and injured in Israel's third major offensive in Gaza in just 6 years. And the shock and outrage across Ireland could be felt in the streets as demonstrations and protests were held. We had our own local protests in Crossmaglen and Uri, and I know that happened everywhere from Derry to Cork. So I'm going to hand you over to Matt Carthy, who's our newly elected MEP for Midlands North West. I think it's the first time I've actually been able to welcome you to Ti Chulainn, so congratulations. Matt recently travelled to Palestine along with MEP Lynn Boylan and MEP Martina Anderson, so he'll speak about his experiences over there. It's also an honour to welcome Fady Abusidu, who's flown in especially for this event, and he's no stranger to Sinn Féin, having spoken in our Ardesh in Belfast in 2011. He's specialised in conflict resolution and is with the International Relations Commission of Fatah. So I'll hand you over to Matt first. Thank you.
Goramaigad Megan agus Goramaigad Galera Soktan Yesha Hartsam Larch on Shaw and Nocht. I have to say that whatever the subject matter, it's an absolute honour to be asked to speak at an event dedicated to Brian Keenan, a man I met probably only a few times, but somebody who I know shaped the struggle that I'm very proud to belong to. I was speaking to quite a number of, I suppose, long-serving activists at Counting Castlebar when we had just been announced that we had won the seat in Midlands North West, and we had already secured the election of Lynn Boylan in Dublin, Martina Anderson in the north, and Leon Uriada in the south. And it was, I suppose, a pivotal moment because it meant for the first time ever that there is now not a single blade of grass in Ireland that isn't represented by a Sinn Féin activist. And I remember speaking to some people, and it was very clear to us, and it is very clear in our mind, that the reason that we have reached this point, and the reason that we're going to make further gains, and the reason we're going to win this struggle is because of the mind of people like Brian Keenan, and we'll be forever grateful for their efforts and for their dedication of their lives to our struggle. I was very pleased when Sean Hughes asked me to come here tonight and I suppose speak about the Palestinian question, but with particular reference to the fact that we recently visited Palestine as part of a team of 13 MEPs from across 7 different countries, and I suppose it was a signal of the importance that we have, as a party, hold this issue, that when that opportunity arose, 3 out of the 4 MEPs were asked to travel on the delegation and to bring our solidarity to the people of Palestine, to see at first hand the circumstances on the ground, and I suppose most importantly at all, to bring back home to gatherings like this our own thoughts and reflections, and even suggestions in terms of how we can play a part on it. So, as part of our ongoing engagements and our attempts to try and build up support for our position, our grouping within the European Parliament, GUI NGL, organised a trip to Palestine. And obviously the primary aim of the trip was to enter into Gaza and see at first hand some of the damage that had been caused. So we arrived into Tel Aviv airport on, I think, early on in the middle of the night on a Wednesday morning or Thursday morning, and getting through Israeli security, isn't an easy thing. Don't think for a minute that you say I'm a member of the European Parliament and you're going to be treated with a bit of respect, let alone any special treatment. There was a guy on our trip who was a former government minister in Cyprus, and he was telling us, makes no difference if you're a government minister at all, unless you actually have a US diplomatic passport there, they don't care. And so you went through, eventually we all got through the other side of the airport, but very quickly we learned that the Israeli government was going to deny us access to Gaza. Now this was post-ceasefire. This is when we're told that Israel was engaged in a peace process and was going to endeavour to end the blockade. They wouldn't allow members of a European Parliament to enter to see it at first hand what was going on. Now we quickly came to understand why that was the case, because during our trip we entered into a community-based hospital in East Jerusalem. You'll see a picture up here of one of the people we met. Now it's a very bad picture because obviously it wasn't something that we wanted to, you didn't want to be coming in with flashes blazing, but there's a wee young lad here coming up. He was a 3-year-old, and he'd lost his leg in the bombing of in Gaza. And that's him there. I know it's a very poor quality. On the other side, to the right of him there, as we're looking in on the bed, his father was there, and he'd also lost his leg in a bombing. And in a hospital 2 miles down the road, his mother was lying in the bed where she'd lost both of her legs, and the rest of the family had been wiped out. That's, to me, was just stark. Now that family weren't involved, they weren't political activists, they certainly weren't military activists. And the whole ward was full of people, but just because I remember he was a wee guy, just a wee, and really smiley young fella, and cheeky young fella. He reminded me of my own kids, and whatever shekels he had in our pocket, and we were throwing them to him, and his eyes lit up, and the same way as you'd expect any other child. But we were speaking to the doctors and the nurses who were there, and they were telling us at first hand what it was like, because the people who got as far as there, they were the lucky ones. If an ambulance was moving out of Gaza and some Israeli official decided on the spot that person's a terrorist, as they would decide, or a combatant, they didn't get past. So there was cases of people dying while waiting for medical intervention, because they wouldn't be permitted out of Gaza. There was people who had been turned back and who had to go and be hid in ambulances and be brought back out. Now you're talking about medical personnel being put in that situation where they're being told you can't actually treat this person. We met with UNRWA. UNRWA is the United Nations relief works agencies. Basically, have the responsibility of providing for education and services for Palestinian refugees wherever they may be in the region. And we met with guys. Now these are cold, professionals in many ways. Like, it's an organisation that's in place since about the 1960s, and we sat down and one of the directors of UNRWA said to us, and these, if I can remember the exact words, he said, nothing could prepare you for Gaza. The devastation is beyond your imagination. And he meant it. He was serious. He says, for anything we can tell you, nothing would prepare you for what you would see in Gaza today. Like, it became very clear for us why Israel was denying us access into the Gaza Strip. Now, these are guys who've been basically working in war zones for the past 40 or 50 years. They know what devastation looks like, and they were telling us quite clearly that nothing could compare. We met with the Palestinian Red Crescent that I mentioned earlier on. And fantastic organisation. They basically operate, they're part of the Red Cross, Red Crescent Alliance. I think they're one of the first bodies, Palestinian bodies, that was actually recognised by an international governing council of the Red Cross. And we met them, and we went in, and they showed us video footage, some of which they said couldn't even be put up on their website. And the lights went down, and they put on a video, and the MEPs and the group, the European Parliament delegation, we were sitting around the board table, and when the lights came back up, nearly everybody was in tears. What struck me, and what I suppose shook me in many ways, was that around the side there was lots of other people there, and when the lights came on, they were all in tears. They were all Palestinian people, and it was only when I was looking back and forth from the video I realised some of them were the same people who were in the videos. They were basically, on the nights of the attacks, had cameras on their helmets or on their bodies. Some of them just said sellotape the phone and press record in order to try and keep some record of what they were seeing. And it was just phenomenal stuff. You've seen people running, you've seen children coming out of homes, you've seen children trying to go back into houses that were in rubble, and this is in the middle of the night because the rest of their family were inside it. One of the things that I think distressed an awful lot of people was a home or a hospital for people with severe, mostly mental disabilities, but also some physical and sensory disabilities. These were, the most vulnerable people in any society, and they were in hospital. And the footage was showing the Red Crescent volunteers taking them out of the hospital because Israel had very kindly given them 40 minutes notice that they were about to bomb the hospital of people with these disabilities. And it was just phenomenal that something like that exists, that it's in the hands and at the disposal, if they wanted, of any governments, and that there is no action taking place. It was really it was really one of the most intense videos that I had ever witnessed in my life, because it just showed, you had seen, obviously they showed footage of the next day when Israel, the one thing about them is the government, they keep their promises, because that building was blown up that night, and some people weren't evacuated in time, including some of the Red Crescent volunteers, but also some of those people with disabilities who were inside it. Some of the videos they showed was probably what we've all seen of the schools being targeted. It was really mind-boggling stuff. And then they showed the footage afterwards of people in hospital beds and all that type of stuff. The most frustrated people we met over the course were people who were in the West Bank who had family in Gaza, and they were telling us about their difficulty in getting stories back during the period, trying to find out where their own loved ones. Met one guy who was telling me how he had rang his home, had found out that everybody had been evacuated safely, was delighted, and met his friend who got a story that wasn't just as positive, and how he had to go home and find a quiet room and basically cry because he was actually so happy that it was his family were safe when his friends weren't. Imagine someone being in that position. We, when we were denied access to Gaza, and we didn't want to spend 4 days in Gaza. We said that to the Israeli. We want to go in. We were quite happy, even for a couple of hours, just to get a sense and meet the people on the ground. So we had a fairly hectic itinerary built up. So we spent most of the time. We were based in Jerusalem, which is in the West Bank. Jerusalem, there's nothing. You can't call it anything other than an apartheid city. The West Jerusalem obviously would have been in Israeli occupation for quite some time, but East Jerusalem basically now is basically suffering land annexation all the time from Israel. They're taking more and more land all the time. The thing that struck me coming back, because we were in Ramallah and we were in Hebron and we were in Bethlehem, and coming back to Jerusalem, and you'd go around the markets in Jerusalem, and I was, in East Jerusalem, that this is supposed to be Palestinian territory, and I remember saying to one of the guys who was with us, there's no Palestinian flags in Jerusalem, or very few compared to, you don't see shops, you don't see buildings, and like the very act of flying a Palestinian flag is illegal in East Jerusalem. It would remind you of Belfast in the 60s. There are train services that operate that are exclusively for the use of Israelis. If a Palestinian is on the train, they're going to be arrested. You would imagine a president like Barack Obama would have something to say about things like that. The settlers, these people who have moved in and taken land, they can vote for the Knesset, the Parliament, but their neighbours can't. It's apartheid is the only word to describe it. But like everywhere we went, you met Palestinian people who are very. I actually find lots of similarities between the Irish, between Irish people. I was joking when we were in Hebron one day. We were going through the markets and meeting some of the characters, and I was saying to somebody who knew Ireland fairly well, it's like Jonesborough back in the good old days. That you have the characters who are selling, and they'll strike a deal, and all of that. And Hebron is a beautiful city. I think there's another picture coming up here, but the Hebron is a city, large enough city of I don't know how many tens of thousands of Palestinians, but it's basically under military occupation in order to facilitate 500 Israeli settlers. I think they're accompanied by about 6,000 troops. So in many parts of Hebron, as kids are going to school, their parents have to let them go at an Israeli post, and they have to walk through these gates and all the rest of it. We got to a part of Hebron that we had some locals with us, and they hadn't been there in 12 years because the Israeli government took it off them. They said in order to keep the settlers safe, we need to. So it was a shopping street. It's basically it's like a ghost town now. It's very, very eerie. But I think there was a sign there. I'm not sure if it's there. That the settlers had put up that this land was stolen off the Jews back in 400 or something AD, and we want it back. And I was joking to some of the Palestinian friends. I don't know if they got my Irish sense of humour. I said, but it's certainly in line for winning the pot calling the kettle black award 2014, because we were in a city that had basically been robbed bit by bit of the people who have lived there all their lives and whose family came there all their lives. This man here is a guy whose son, just I think a fortnight before we had got there, that's in East Jerusalem, had been kidnapped by settlers. 17 years old, was taken, disappeared. The family tried desperately through the Israeli police, contacting them, all the rest, couldn't get answers. The usual, it's just collusion. It's like listen to some of the stories from here, from Portadown, and in the 80s and 90s. But disappeared. When eventually he was found, it had transpired that he was tortured. They had doused him in petrol. They had made him swallow petrol, and they had set him alight. And the family basically got back a charred 17-year-old. His crime was being Palestinian in Jerusalem, and he'd been taken. And there's lots of implications now, even at this very early stage, that he has, that the police have been frustrating the investigation and protecting the people who are there. That memorial that you've seen there, it's actually a lovely memorial. It's a garden just outside a local community centre. But when we were leaving it, the Israeli government had issued a directive that it had to be removed, that they were going to remove it. Just a memorial in a Palestinian area to commemorate a 17-year-old who had been tortured and killed. And put into very plain context, it's amazing when going back to three Israelis who were kidnapped from settler land, which is basically land that had been robbed of the Palestinians not that long ago, certainly since 1967, and that's not to condone their kidnapping, but everyone in the world knew they had been kidnapped. Everybody in the world knew it was actually the pretext for the most recent bombardment. I don't think anybody heard about this young person, and he's not an isolated instance. And the only reason I tell of his story is because we actually met his father, very brave man. We also met his mother, who was naturally in the grieving process, as they both were, and as all the family were. As I say, whatever we're doing in terms of as a party raising the issue, trying to receive support, whether it be in the Assembly, in the Dáil, in the European Union, whatever we're doing, it's not enough. We have to try and do some more. I'm acutely aware of Irish history. What I've seen in parts of the West Bank, and the West Bank is supposed to be the peaceful area, if you like, doesn't compare. You can't even compare almost the worst day in the last 100 years in Ireland to what's happening there in terms of the impact of occupation, in terms of the numbers. If you look at even within 50 days, 2,200 people killed in Gaza alone. The one thing that struck me in the West Bank, everywhere I went, because to leave any of the cities, even Ramallah, which is under Palestinian control, to leave to go to work somewhere else, you have to go through a checkpoint, sometimes being held up for a number of hours. We were coming through one day on the bus, and the Israeli government, or the Israeli army, had started firing tear gas into the middle of the cars, because there were some young kids had taken it upon themselves to throw stones. But the one thing that struck me, and I said it and I probably should just say this, we actually met with a number of Israeli organisations as well, some of whom were fantastic. Organisations like Rabbis for Peace. We met a number of political activists who share our views. They're Israeli Jews, but they share our views. We met one guy who told us very clearly that as an Israeli, that he believed Israel was on the brink of becoming a fascist state. Now, for us, I think they've gone beyond that brink, but for an Israeli citizen to say that was very strong for me. We also met some of the opposition members of the Israeli parliament. Some of it would be described as progressive. I have to say, they would leave you one. They would make the DUP look like absolute moderates, and these were they were all very, very sympathetic towards the aspiration of ending the occupation and creation of a Palestinian state. But when you dare suggest that maybe you make the comparison, like I've done earlier on, to apartheid, they lost a feckin' head, and were very strong in their arguments that there should be no international boycott or sanctions or divestment. Certainly, they believed that would only upset the Israeli people. So that was a very frustrating thing. But I will just finish on what I said to them, that if the Israeli people don't acknowledge the hurt that they are causing, the damage that they are causing, and the absolute carnage that they are inflicting on the Palestinian people, and make moves to amend those injustices, then they will be part of the real losers. Because I have to say, as somebody not from and with no connection to the area, if I was a friend of the 17-year-old, or if I was living beside that wall in Bethlehem, And as a 17-year-old, I would want to fight back. And to me, it is a credit to all the Palestinian political organisations that they have managed to keep their young people, I suppose, in line in terms of advocating negotiations and peace settlements. Because in my view, if Israel doesn't wake up, there will be another intifada, and nobody is going to win out of that, and that's including the Israeli people. So Israel needs to accept its responsibilities. There is an opportunity to have a two-state solution that will allow two countries to live side by side and hopefully develop friendly relations in the future. But I know people have heard this quote before, but I always use it, and it's one from Nelson Mandela. We know too well that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians. And like in so many other areas, Nelson Mandela was right.
Matt, I just want to ask everyone to give a warm Armagh welcome to our Palestinian comrade, Fady Abusidu.
You just made my job much more difficult now. Comrades and brothers and sisters, this is not my first time in Ireland. I came here a few times before. I had the pleasure and honor of meeting some of you before on many occasions. Last time I addressed the Óglach, and I met quite a few friends, met new friends, and made great connections. Every time I come to Ireland, I feel a great and warm welcome. The first time I did, it was 2002. I saw some Israeli flags on the street. 2010, there were less or fewer Israeli flags. 2011, there were none. Today, I saw nothing but Palestinian flags. This is a sign and a clear indication of where Ireland stands, where the people of Ireland stand, and the great effort, great solidarity that the Sinn Féin is projecting here and abroad. Today I had the pleasure of meeting quite a few activists and social support organizations, and I met a lovely young girl, the daughter of Mary, who drew this picture for the children of Palestine, and her son who makes bracelets for the children of Palestine because he could not join a demonstration. It's a genuine, beautiful gesture that only reflects the purity of the people of Ireland. Today we're gathered to remember Brian Keenan, and while the ties and similarities between Fatah and the Sinn Féin extend for decades, and while the journey of freedom and struggle that our two people have been through, have gone through stages and stops and challenges that only solidified this relationship between our two people and our two parties, this journey would not have been achieved or would not have achieved many of its goals without great leadership. Brian Keenan is without a doubt one of those leaders that were not afraid to fight and to struggle the battle on the street and the battle of the peace process. Our late leader, Yasser Arafat, is another leader who fought on the street and fought the peace process. And both leaders will be remembered for the achievements and the people they've touched and their charisma and for the changes that they made on the ground. Today, I come to you in another historical junction that our people are facing. I'm not going to go through the details of what's going on the ground or what happened in Gaza, because I think Matt have done a brilliant job in explaining in details what's happening there, and I cannot follow that. what can I say is where we go from here. Today, President Abbas have addressed the United Nations General Assembly again and have delivered another speech expressing and reminding the international community once again, as he did in 2013 and 2012, of the problem that the people of Palestine are having in their relationship with Israel, and that the aims and objectives of the Israeli leadership have always been to achieve security and land grab on the expense of the Palestinian people and on the expense of the two-state solution. Today, President Abbas at the General Assembly confirmed once again that the situation cannot continue as it is, and we cannot be locked into a process of peace negotiations for the sake of negotiations, while the Israelis embark on a policy of expansion, settlement activities, and while they let free a bunch of settlers on the Palestinian land that terrorize civilians, kidnap and kill and steal land. The situation in Gaza is quite dire. The last Israeli aggression have basically transformed Gaza from a big prison into a prison with nothing but trouble inside. The Palestinian factions and the Palestinian people have embarked in the process of self-healing, reconciliation, and have signed an agreement for unity a few months ago. The response to that was a campaign of destruction, accusations, threats made by the Israelis that was followed by the devastation we saw in Gaza. The aim of that campaign, contrary to what the Israelis would claim, was to ensure the division between the Palestinian territories, keeping Gaza destroyed and isolated, keeping the West Bank divided, non-continuous, and without real authority. The whole idea behind this, the whole objective, is to ensure that no Palestinian unity can emerge in order to call for the Palestinian rights. The good news is the Palestinians are aware of this, and they did not allow these objectives to materialize. 2 days ago, Palestinian factions, including Hamas, including Fatah and Islamic Jihad and other Palestinian groups, have met in Egypt and reaffirmed their commitment to the Palestinian unity government, to reconciliation, and stood fast behind the policy that President Abbas portrayed at the General Assembly today. What President Abbas described is a path to peace through focusing on our strength. While Israel utilized its military strength to achieve its objectives, we also need to utilize our strength in the form of the legality of our cause, the international tools that are available to us. And President Abbas today have called upon the international community to take its responsibility after he affirmed the failure of the process of peace and negotiations as it's known for the past 22 years. He called upon the international community and the Security Council to move forward, go ahead, issue a resolution with clear parameters, a clear timetable that lead to the end of occupation. The process of going through international organizations is nothing new to us. We went through it twice before. We failed once. We succeeded the second time. We gained the recognition of the Palestinian state as an observer state at the United Nations. We managed to enforce the status of Palestine as a state under occupation in various international organizations. We gained the recognition of so many states for the state of Palestine. This process was successful. This process has aimed on changing the balance of power in favor of a more balanced process that could deliver progress towards peace. The Palestinian call today at the General Assembly focused on the end of occupation. And we have no illusions about what will happen, because it is very clear to us that the American ally to Israel will veto this process, will veto this resolution as soon as it reaches the Security Council. And that was not made in secret. Foreign Secretary Kerry expressed this explicitly to the European partners and to President Abbas. However, this time we are ready. We have the Arab world behind us, who once again adopted the Arab Peace Initiative as the path to peace. And this time, when this resolution, which is just and in line with all international regulations and all international law and all international resolutions, when it's vetoed, we will have no alternative but to embark on a new phase of our struggle through legal means. We will join the Roma Declaration. We will activate and call on the parties subscribing to the Fourth Geneva Convention to activate it, and we will pursue Israel on all international arenas of legal value. We will definitely achieve the legal framework that would allow a change in the balance of power that will destroy the myth of self-defense that Israel is hiding behind, that will allow us to gain new tools to engage in a more meaningful process of negotiations toward peace, but on equal foot and with clear parameters and with consequences. The situation in Palestine, and when it comes to the claim of self-defense, is quite ridiculous, to be honest. Our Commissioner for International Relations of Fatah received an international delegation of Italian MEPs a few weeks ago, who argued strongly against what happened in Gaza, and argued for the Israeli position that you need to understand that they have the right to self-defense. The response of our commissioner was quite interesting. They had met before, they know each other from the past. Once the Italian MEP said that, our commissioner slapped him with a very gentle slap. It was not a big deal because they are friends, sort of thing. So the MEP was extremely surprised and asked him, "What are you doing?" So he responded by saying, "Well, I'm giving you the excuse to express and exercise self-defense. Now I slapped you. You have all the legal coverage to go and destroy my house, rape my wife, kill my child, destroy my home, and you have all the parameters for that." And this is exactly what's happening in Palestine. The rockets that the Israelis use as a justification for what they did in Gaza, in terms of impact, in terms of effectiveness, do not reflect anything more than the stones that the Palestinian children in Jerusalem throw at the police. In Israel's own words, the Iron Dome that the Israelis use have intercepted 90% of all rockets. And those rockets that managed to make their way into Israel have affected 3 civilians, 2 of which went to hospital out of shock, not out of injury. And the last one that was injured was actually treated on the same day and let go. But does that justify the amount of destruction, the amount of killing, the amount of murder, the destruction of the infrastructure that would allow stability in the future? I don't think so. The notion of achieving security through destruction have proved to be fatal and ineffective in so many other conflicts. It's only in Israel that they still pursue this route. And it has proven again to be destabilizing. I mean, if we look at the region in general and examine what's going on in the Middle East at the moment, the instability and turmoil that is experienced in so many Arab countries is not a recipe for stability. And if Israel is surrounded by ISIS in the north and the east, and if Israel is afraid from all these refugees that are pouring into Jordan, pouring into Lebanon from neighboring countries, what will they expect if they refuse to negotiate with the Palestinian Unity government because a component of that government is from Hamas? The government is not from Hamas, just a component of it is from Hamas, and that government has been recognized internationally. The European Union have welcomed the Palestinian reconciliation. recognize the importance of full engagement with the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian Reconciliation Government as a path to peace. If Israel choose not to acknowledge this process, if Israel choose to stand alone against all the international legitimacy, if Israel choose to stand against all international recommendations, what do they expect will come from that rubble in Gaza? It's not going to be Hamas. It's going to be something much worse. And we need to put an end to that. We need to put an end to the circle of violence through international means. And that's what we aim to achieve through this international process. Stabilizing the region, ending the siege on Gaza, and ultimately achieving stability and security through peace and not through military means.